Our next session is Power Law User Acquisition in the Age of AI. How have you been, Cindy?
I've been well. Thanks so much for having me here, Julia.
Super excited. Got a lot of feedback from our folks and can wait just to jump into it. Do you mind giving quick introduction before we just get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So today I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes with you all, share a little bit more about some of my experience leading user acquisition at over five technology, fast growth companies. And there's really been a lot that's changed, particularly in the last few years here. However, there are a few universal truths around how these channels operate. And when it comes to finding really scalable, durable, repeatable channels for growth, there are some fundamental frameworks that I've been able to develop in my career over the last 12 years and wanted to share a sneak peek of that with everyone today. So that's what I'll be diving into.
It's good.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. And let's dive in. So, yeah, welcome to probably the midpoint of your AI practice sessions or a little bit after that. And today we're going to be talking all about this concept of power law user growth, which I'll define a bit more as we get into the presentation here. Kind of quick context, I alluded to this a bit in the introduction here, but a lot is changing around the growth landscape. When you browse LinkedIn, when you chat with your teammates, when you chat with peers in the growth space, the number one thing you hear is this worry about moving faster, this fear of channels being saturated. And the outcome of that really has been that a lot of these AI native startups are seeing growth at a trajectory that's way faster than anything that we've seen before. These are just a handful of the examples of some companies that have gone from zero to tens of millions, even hundreds of millions in ARR within just the course of a few months. And that's actually a bit of a stark contrast from the last few years. So pre-age of AI, we had startups really launch their hypothesis around their core products. And what we saw was that even some of the top B2B startups took an average of, let's say, 2 years to hit their first $1 million in ARR, right? So the landscape is moving a lot faster and things are changing dramatically. So the best way to really seize that opportunity is we need to figure out how we can grow not just with linear outcomes, but with power law outcomes, right? Because if we know that this landscape of channels is getting saturated and everybody's vying for attention and there are a lot more competitors out there, then the best thing that we can do is figure out how we can drive nonlinear growth. And just to paint that picture a bit more here, I have on screen a few examples of different traffic sources for some of the aforementioned fast growing AI native startups, right? And there's one pattern that you see consistently across all these traffic sources, which is essentially that there's one or two, maybe three channels that drive the majority of growth. These are what we call power law outcomes. And this is the primary thesis that I have when I walk into any company. When I join a company and my mandate is to grow revenue for a company, my job is to figure out how do we identify those power law outcomes? And that's to figure out the one or two channels that will help drive the majority of growth for a company. And I've been able to do this at many companies where I've led growth. For instance, teams at Meta, Pinterest, Descript, just to name a few. And I also teach growth marketing and this topic a little bit more broadly as well at UC Berkeley, Stanford, and run a growth advisory as well. But enough of that introduction. Let's dive into the framework here. So I've done my best to condense that framework and those learnings into these three steps that I replicate every time I step into one of these new head of growth roles. The three steps are the following. First, we want to identify for this company that we're talking about, what are our product's natural advantages? We'll define that in a second here. The second step is we need to figure out how we can match the best channels to fit those advantages. And lastly, we want to use AI to maximize our positioning tests across those channels. So let's dive into it, starting with the first step here, identifying our product's natural advantages. Well, before we define that, let's talk about the landscape of channels. There's actually a finite number of power law channels out there, meaning that these channels are repeatable, scalable, cost efficient to invest in, and we can count on them time and time again to drive continued growth, right? So if we can put all the channel categories on a list here, that means that we can actually limit the scope of what we're testing. But the reality is that when we're leading growth, when we're trying to drive revenue for a company, our main goal is not to come in here and just cross off the list. Like, I don't get hired to go through this entirety of the list and cross everything off and say, I tested it, it didn't work, this is not going to work for us. No, instead, my goal is to figure out how to be strategic and figure out which of the channels are the best fit for my product. And that's where natural advantages come in. You have a product, and it naturally is going to have some kind of distribution advantages. The two key criteria and the two factors that I've found to be most important and advantageous are the following. The first is some kind of virality advantage. This usually refers to product or social virality. So this answers the question of how likely are you to go viral? And something goes viral when it can hit an N+1 audience, meaning that the product is, for instance, used by multiple people. It's easily shared socially on social platforms or with other people in conversations and threads and emails. So that's virality potential. The second category is whether or not the product is something people easily understand and are actively shopping for and will buy. This refers to your conversion likelihood, right? If somebody knows what they want and they understand what it is that you're offering, you're much more likely to get them to buy it versus offering something that they don't understand. So the intersection of your virality potential and your conversion potential is where I believe, and I've learned over time, this gives you your best unfair advantage when it comes to user acquisition and distribution more broadly. If we break that down a bit further, I found that products generally have three types of natural advantages, discrete productized experiences. The first one is product sharing. The second is social sharing, and the third is existing demand. I'll define each of these for you. Starting with product sharing. Product sharing refers to the fact that the product just gets better as other people use it with you. So, for instance, if your product is a B2B tool and it's generally collaborative, people can comment in it, edit with you, share workspaces, that's a product that's more useful the more people use it. Or it could also be a product that gets more valuable as other people join. Typical product network effects, you get more inventory in a marketplace that you can take advantage of. And also, these are products that are really meant for sharing with other people. So, for example, if you film a video of yourself talking through meeting notes or talking through a concept and you share with your teammate, that's really meant to be viewed by N+1 or somebody else in an organization. So some product sharing examples here, more visually as well. For instance, if you are using Stripe invoices and you bill a customer, they receive the bill and they see the Stripe logo as part of receiving that invoice to pay. And during that process, if they need an invoicing tool, they will naturally think of Stripe. Similarly with Figma, if you're a Figma user, it's really meant to be collaborative, right? You want to have somebody else on your team review that file, leave comments, edit it, etc. So it's really meant to be shared. The second category is social sharing. Social sharing advantages take place when sharing the product in some way gives the user who's sharing it some kind of social utility, social benefit, recognition, or rewards, right? And these are product experiences that sometimes are visual in nature because visual items like images or videos are really easy to share with other people and post in different places. These could also be experiences that give you some kind of status or recognition. For example, the Strava app, which is an app that helps you to track and document how much physical activity that you're engaging in. Well, if you just had a run and you're super proud of the stats of that run, you're very likely to share it with your friends or on social and in other places. Or Opus Clip, which is a tool that helps you turn long form video into viral short clips. These are this is very visually engaging content. So that video is going to naturally be shared on social platforms. So passive sharing experiences like watermarks, for instance, work really well here. And the last category of advantages tend to be existing demand. This is where you are building a product that you know a lot of people are already searching for, or it's targeting some kind of latent demand. So just a clear example here, if you are a company like, say, Asana, a category that you probably care a lot about is, say, project management software, right? Well, it turns out that a lot of people are already searching for that in Google search. So you definitely want to show up in search engines. But let's say that you're thinking about building a new product. Let's say you want to think about like an AI girlfriend concept because you love the movie Her. And you go on, one of these keyword research tools, you find that it actually turns out there's a lot of people searching for AI girlfriend. A keyword difficulty is somewhere between easy and medium, meaning that there's not a lot of competition. So this is an example of you identifying that there's people who are actively searching for maybe a category of product or tools that don't exist yet, and you're going to be able to target the latent demand that exists for it. So once we've identified our product's advantages, one of those three categories, product sharing, social sharing, or existing demand, now what we need to do is we need to go back to that list of 7 categories of channels, the one that fit the page, and we need to figure out what are the top channels that best fit my advantages so I can really grow at the intersection of my virality plus my high conversion. And we want to start with the B2B framework here that helps us to match those two together. On the x-axis, we have that virality potential, combining the product and social sharing virality. And on the y-axis, we have how much existing demand we're targeting, whether it's really high or really low. If you're a B2B company and you're trying to target high existing demand, depending on whether you're targeting the low social virality versus high social virality, there are different channels where your main goal is to figure out how you can capture an existing need. So search engines, the ability to share the product within an organization, and even outbound sales with a very, very targeted pitch targeting very specific persona or ICP. These are great ways for you to be able to get power law effects for your acquisition. And if you're targeting low existing demand, your main job is convince the people that are potentially buyers for your product of a need. So the best thing to do here is going to be focusing on channels that allow for you to reach your target audience, but use things like communities and content and passive shares to subtly and slowly influence these individuals over time so that you build trust, credibility, and ultimately conversion in the longer run. We'll go through a few examples here of spanning the spectrum from low social sharing to high, and starting with Canva, which is a more individual focused tool to start with. When Canva first launched, they're in this category of digital design tools. And this is definitely already a very big category, meaning that there's a lot of search demand for it. So SEO is a great channel for them. And because it's something that people understand, when they use organic social as a strategy, they can create content that resonates with a lot of people. Another example, a product that's really made for small and medium-sized teams, Vanta. Vanta, when they first launched, they are a compliance solution for people like developers and people who are building products. And when they first launched, you really thought of compliance as a solution primarily for enterprises. So they really carved their own space, and they started out by creating a lot of content that helped developers and companies understand why even as small and medium-sized businesses needed to care about building compliance and security into their products. So this allowed for them to drive a lot of credibility and drive a lot of awareness amongst their target user base. And lastly, we have an enterprise-facing product with high existing demand, Rippling, an all-in-one HR platform. This is definitely a space that has a lot of existing demand. A lot of companies and enterprises already use HR solutions abundantly in their companies. So, Rippling, by innovating on a few feature sets and their holistic all-in-one platform, they can be very targeted about who they reach out to through an outbound sales motion. And of course, as more employees join the company, they're able to, easily invite people and onboard more people into the product itself. So, here, the high existing demand channels are really those that allow for you to target as many of those high intent customers as possible through search engines, through that cold outreach. And then secondarily, with a low existing demand, your main goal is to use content or the influence of other people, whether that's people in your target community, other thought leaders and influencers, to convince people and to convince companies of a need. So these are some of the B2B examples here. Let's transition and look at what this might look like for consumer companies, B2C. We again look at the x-axis here, the product and social sharing type on an x-axis, and then y-axis is how much existing demand that we're targeting. Well, for consumer companies, if you're targeting a lot of high existing demand, your main goal is to target and appeal to personal utility, meaning that you're trying to help individuals understand why is it going to be beneficial that you use this product. And here, very similarly, your goal is to use channels that target that intention through search, through organic social, referrals, etc. If you're a consumer company and you're targeting low existing demand, you'll want to actually appeal to some of that social utility. So your goal is to try to figure out how you can provide that status, reward, or recognition that gets people excited about engaging in this product, even if they're not looking to use that product at this very moment. So a few examples to go through here, going from, individual to higher social and product sharing potential. Individual product, let's start with Aura Ring. Aura Ring is a sleep tracking wearable. You wear the physical wearable while you're going about your day, while you're in bed, and it tracks how well you sleep, which gives you metrics so that you can actually improve your sleep. And when Aura Ring first launched, they were first in their category. People weren't looking up sleep tracking wearables. People didn't even know that there was such a concept. So Aura Ring really leaned into paid advertising, working with influencers to drive up that credibility and awareness about the category. Looking at products for small groups like Venmo. Venmo is really designed for small groups of friends and neighbors and people who knew each other to split bills. And this is why it worked really well for them to launch within specific communities and benefit from referrals as a great way for them to drive power law outcomes for user acquisition. And lastly, large social, Fortnite. Fortnite is a game that's played by a lot of people online at the same time. When they first launched, they were category creating. So their main way of growing actually were twofold. Firstly, some of the game clips that users engaged with were shared on social media. Those clips were seen by a lot more other potential players. And then secondly, a lot of streamers through game streaming platforms would stream their experiences, and their massive audiences would follow along and want to be encouraged to play the games as well. So, similarly here for consumer products, if people already know that they have a need, your main job with these power law channels is to figure out how to find them across social, search, and these various communities. And if you're targeting a category with low existing demand, you really want to use channels that can put you in front of those target customers that you have. But again, you need to figure out how you can use a combination of content and influence to get them excited about potentially using the product at a later time. Once we figured out what those top channels are that map to our advantages, this is where we want to use AI to maximize how well we test those channels. And the playbook here is simple now in our age of AI. Our main goal is to figure out how we can maximize positioning across these different channels and their audiences. What is not going to work in today's day and age is taking one singular message and positioning and spread it across all of those different tests that we have across different channels. And the reason is because every user that interacts with an ad or interacts with some kind of inbound messaging from a brand or a company across all of these different platforms, they're used to receiving information in different ways. So even something like, let's say, paid ads, Meta ads versus Google ads, even within Meta ads themselves, you want to make sure that you're testing 5 to 10 different variants on your positioning. Instead of just saying, well, my overall product positioning is X, and that's the only tagline that I'm going to test. In fact, if you test it that way and it doesn't work, it doesn't necessarily mean that the channel is not going to work for you. It means that you haven't figured out how to talk to the audience yet. So this is where really in the age of AI, it's really crucial and really beneficial to be able to also use AI to generate those different positioning tests on your behalf. Here's a quick little tutorial on how I've been able to do this. I have on the left side here an example of a prompt template that I use no matter what channel it is that I'm creating different positioning variants for. And the process to go through an example with perhaps ads copy is very simple. You choose your favorite LLM tool to generate copy. Imagine you can probably do this for visual assets as well. You want to provide context and details around the channel, the product, your brand style and tone, audience, and conversion goals. The most important part of this example here, but all the other templates that you want to provide is providing examples. So definitely want to use tools like the Meta Ads Library, the Google Ads Library. Find competitor examples of ads that have been running for a really long time. If it's been running a really long time, it means it's probably working for one of your competitors or adjacent companies that you are observing. Provide those examples as part of the prompt. And you basically want to have an output format that gets the LLM to generate 10 plus positioning variants. You pick the best ones and then you run with it. And this will allow for you to essentially identify whether or not it's a positioning problem or it's just the channel that's not working for you. So, you really want to maximally test as many positioning variants as possible. This is very different, by the way, than maybe doing this 5 years ago, where actually adding in new positioning variants because changing a positioning may actually require you to change not just the headline and the description, but also the landing page and the copy on that landing page and the follow-up emails. Now, all of that can actually be very streamlined and generated with AI tools. So, the cost of testing these maximal positions is actually much, much lower and should be a core part of you testing whether or not this is actually a channel that works for your product. Those are the 3 quick steps. And, let's say you've run through the steps, you ran all the positioning tests and it didn't work. So, now what? Do we start back at top number 1? Well, actually, there's another way to solve this, which is actually thinking about your product strategy relative to this framework. What you want to think about is how you can actually build products for distribution. There's a few ways to think about this. If you're building a product that maybe is emerging tech, people don't really quite understand or grasp it yet, you want to figure out how you can get people excited about your company or your products. Well, one thing you can do is actually figure out how you can build core features into your product experience that target that high existing demand, right? A great example here is a company like Credit Karma. Now, Credit Karma launched a free credit score poll. And before they did this, every time you wanted to check your credit score, you'd have to pay one of these other providers. So Credit Karma launched one of the first free personal credit score checks. And when you search for a credit score check, you basically see Credit Karma offering the only free version of it, right? So users were inclined to convert. This also allowed for them to rank in search engines, and they could double down on that search presence as well by running those pages as paid search ads because there's so much demand there. So this is an example of a company that actually offers this vast personal financial data platform, which people may not want to buy right away, but they care a lot about free credit scores as the primary driving topic. So this allows for them to be able to target a really high demand category and acquire users. The second way to build for distribution is, build for even more demand that exists out there. For example, a company like Wix, they have an online website builder. There's so many website builders out there, but we know that it's a very big category and we know people need these kinds of tools. But Wix actually built a logo maker on top of their core website builder. So this is actually a bit adjacent. It's not really part of that core website stack, but they launched a separate logo maker because they knew that their target small business audience would, during their early stages of incorporating the business, would eventually need to figure out how to get a logo before they launch the websites. So allow for them to target these users upstream, and they knew that there was a lot of existing demand for this category. One of the other ways to build for distribution is trying to think about how you can make it easier for people to export the output of your product experience. For example, a company like ElevenLabs, which actually also showed up on our list of some of the fastest growing AI native startups out there. ElevenLabs is a voice API for businesses and enterprises. And they actually built a free AI voice generator demo that wasn't just used by, serious developers and enterprise customers who are seriously exploring the technology, but it's actually used by a lot of consumers. And specifically, these consumers were content creators who really wanted to understand the bleeding edge of voice AI. So they would use the AI voice generator, generate these audio clips, post about it on social, and this actually resulted in hundreds of millions of views across organic social media. So thinking about ways of making it super easy and valuable for people to get social value out of using the product by exporting the output in some way is a great way of thinking about building for distribution. We're nearing the end of our time here, and I wanted to provide a quick recap on the past 25 minutes that we've spent together here. When you think about power law acquisition, you really want to think about not just testing through every possible user acquisition channel. No, instead our goal is to figure out how we can focus most of our resources on our top 1 to 2 power law channels because we want power law outcomes. When we're targeting those channels, we don't just arbitrarily pick them. We don't just pick them based on what competitors are using. Instead, we want to mirror them to our product's advantages. The 3 categories to consider are product sharing, social sharing, and existing demand advantages. When we're testing those channels, we really need to maximize how we test positioning. The framing on the product oftentimes can change the outcomes of the channel dramatically. So we definitely want to be using AI to maximize those positioning tests. And finally, if all else fails, you can think about actually shaping your product strategy around distribution. How do you make it easy for people to help you grow the product? And this is what drives power law or viral growth rather than linear growth. And I think we're nearing the end of our time here. Really appreciate everyone's time and attention. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I teach these topics at UC Berkeley online across many different platforms. If you're interested in courses like that, definitely shoot me a note and I'll definitely send you the links. Thanks so much, everyone.
What a treat, Sandy. Thank you so much. Super insightful. I enjoy reading your newsletter and encouraging our folks. Please subscribe to Sandy's newsletter. I know you have a micro community, which is excellent too. Sandy, just curious to get your take on, since you're testing a lot of AI tools, especially for growth and marketing, what technology are you most excited about in the market right now?
I'm really excited about tools that allow for us to upload as much context as possible. I know I was alluding a bit to this. There's a lot of unbundling that we're seeing with different functions of growth. For example, if we looked at just simply creative assets, there are tools that help you create, long form video, like short social clips for like Instagram versus LinkedIn versus, X, etc. So there's a lot of unbundling happening in the space. And I think one of the challenges with that is growth decisions like this need to be made in the context of all the data that we have. And I think one of the challenges that I have with those tools right now is it kind of takes a really specialized operator to be able to make
Mhm.
good decisions around whether or not the outputs of those are actually good, so to speak. Right. And so I know that these tools will improve over time, especially as they have more usage and they have their own models and data around those specialties. But personally, I think that it's actually much more worthwhile to figure out how to build your own custom stack using your own like personalized model. You can pick any foundational model of your choice here. Like I, use Claude an incredible amount for writing. But the more that Claude knows how I think about different channels, the types of copy that I consider to be good, and then when I can feed back in the copy that actually worked, it does a much, much, much better job of producing net new content for me on the other side of it. So I think I'm much more excited about tools that allow for that context upload. And I'm curious whether or not that can be bundled in some way. So, kind of a question mark for me, but that's how I think about it.
I have a couple of questions here from our community, and 2 minutes to address some of those. So here's one. What's the biggest mistake companies make when scaling acquisition channels?
Biggest mistake. I think it depends on the stage of company. For earlier stage, smaller teams, the biggest mistake I find is not trying to double down on those power law channels. I think there's this urgency in small companies to grow as fast as possible. So when you see something working early, your first instinct is to like duplicate it, right?
Mhm.
And find a second or third or like five ways to do it rather than like really make this channel scale up. So I think that's the mistake I see for early stage. And then for more later stage companies, I think one of the challenges I see there is, kind of letting the metrics get ahead of like intuition about customers. The larger a channel gets, the more it's about figuring out the LTV to CAC and balancing investments and growth over time. And then you really start to, pick apart the data in every which way. But I think what that ends up driving sometimes is this overall lack of awareness around like how customer intuition should be paired into those channels. And that draws companies to basically like pull back investments in channels that could actually be working better if they were to put in more resources. Oftentimes those resources come, by the way, with that similar insight that we had in our presentation today around positioning insights. Over time, especially if a company's invested in, let's say, paid ads for 2 to 3 years or even greater than that, well, the market already knows the product. Your audience starts to become finite in who you're able to reach. Audience expansion only works if you have positioning for a new adjacent group of users who can benefit from the product experience. So there's saturation that happens, and it's hard to build that into the strategy if you're just looking at LTV to CAC, if you're just looking at payback period, if you're just measuring it based on the existing experiments and campaigns that have worked. So I think it depends on early stage versus later stage.
Thank you so much. And we are transitioning to our next session.